You know, it was only a matter of time before someone made a manga about this, but I didn't think it would be so cringe. How my weebs doing this week? So glad to see you. This week's theme is, there's not really a theme. I kind of just picked up whatever I wanted this week, which is really most weeks. Anyway, let's get into the manga reviews for this week and which manga you should pick up yourself. You know, the thing about big Shonen Jump titles is that they're pretty ubiquitous in the anime community. That is to say, most people know what they are about, even if you've never read them. For example, every last person in the anime community could tell you that One Piece is about a guy who stretches really well and is trying to find some pirate treasure. Everyone knows that Naruto is about some kid named Naruto who wants to become ninja president. Even more relatively niche titles like Dr. Stone and Shonen Jump are a known quantity in the anime community. Hey babe, I just need to ask you a really quick question. What is Dr. Stone about?
I was thinking like he got stuck in the Stone Ages, so like he's got to teach everyone how to science and shit because he knows how to make all the shit to get to help them progress through society.
See what I mean? But weirdly enough, most people I know who have not read Black Clover couldn't actually tell me what it's about. Me included! Black Clover is a relatively well-selling battle shonen that hasn't penetrated the popular culture in the way that some other series have. However, Black Clover fans are by far the most insistent that it's the best new-gen manga. By the way, I really hate the term new-gen, but whatever. After months of pushing and the manga finally going on sale, I decided to pick it up. So what did I think? It was pretty good, I guess. Like most shonen, the characters are unique enough that you'll probably be engaged such that you'll want to stick through the end of the book. The premise is as simple as it comes. We live in a magical world and we want to become Wizard King. Our main character, Asta, wants to become Wizard King but can't use magic. One day, he stumbles on something called anti-magic, which gives him the ability to do what exactly you think it does. He utilizes his exceptional physical abilities to do typical shonen stuff that you expect him to do. If I had to choose one standout thing about it, it would probably be Asta's brother, Yuno. Normally in anime and manga, rival characters are written to be distant, edgy, or just plain assholes. The purpose of this writing is to create a foil to the main character to exemplify his overall righteousness, as well as create some connection to the younger audience who have probably faced a similar obstacle before. It also allows for the creation of an edgy anti-hero, which gives a sort of tacit allowance to the audience to cheer on a not-so-righteous character. From what I've read from this book though, Yuno is not a character that plans to go in that direction. And sure, there are dozens of volumes to go, but it's made relatively clear by this book that Yuno's gonna be relatively supportive of Asta's underdog story, rather than just shit on him at every possible turn. Now to be fair, Bakugo has been a far more supportive protagonist in the later arcs of My Hero Academia, but we had to sit through hundreds and hundreds of chapters of Bakugo basically telling Deku to kill himself. If I had to choose one thing that makes me look forward to more of reading this manga, it would be Yuno actually supporting our main character throughout the story rather than just being an insufferable edgelord that changes halfway through. All that being said, I can tell from the first volume of Black Clover that there's going to be a gigantic cast of unchanging caricatures that don't really dive into any kind of nuance. Now, I get it, it's shonen, but I'm just saying that all the red flags are there at the moment. At the same time, however, some foundations for some fantastic world building has been set. The fact of the world that I am most looking forward to being expanded upon is the disproportionality of how magic is distributed throughout the kingdom, depending on how close to the capital you are, meaning that we might have a similar class structure to Attack on Titan. My prediction is that Asta's lack of magical ability plays into this oppressive system somehow, but frankly, I might just be overanalyzing things. Now that I've gassed up the series enough, the stands should be able to stick around for the next part. There's absolutely nothing unique about Black Clover's premise whatsoever, at least from this book. Consider the following. If I describe the following character to you, what would you think? A young kid who grew up separated from his family doesn't have the same abilities that everyone else near him has, so people discount him, avoid him, and underestimate him. Despite this, he has the drive to succeed that nearly nobody else does, and insists that he's going to become the next insert super important position that stands above everyone else here, despite this lack of ability. One day, he stumbles upon a super special something that lets him compete with everyone else, and the adventure begins. That's pretty much Asta's character without using any Black Clover terms, but in essence, that's every single shonen character ever made. Now I know what you're gonna say, why does every other shonen get a pass? And the answer would be simple. The chapters for this book came out in 2015 in a post-Big 3 world inhabited by more unique shonen series. To me, Black Clover is trying to be the last hurrah of a more simplistic battle fantasy shonen, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's clear that the bar is much higher. For sure, I'm gonna be picking up a couple more volumes before I drop it, but it didn't necessarily wow me like everyone said it would. Wow, that was a lot for a 5-year-old series. All in all, Black Clover Volume 1 was not a bad manga by any respect. After all, it's a mainline Shonen Jump series, so there's a certain level of high quality that you expect. Tabata's art style is perfect for the series and lends itself to some great character designs. And overall, I found myself rooting for Asta's success. It's just that there isn't anything unique here whatsoever. 6.5 out of 10. Next up is how the Realist hero rebuilt the kingdom. You know, it's sometimes difficult to put into words how much you dislike a certain genre. Maybe the vibe isn't for you, or there's a certain aspect of the content you don't like. But personally, I can perfectly explain why I hate isekai. Isekai is more of a story trope than an actual genre, but it's so ubiquitous to otaku culture that we basically consider it one. In essence, it offers a simple fantasy to your average nerd, the ability to leave this world and go to a new one with more powers. At its core, there's nothing wrong with this particular story. After all, it allows for some relatively unique fish out of water stories, or at least provides some kind of interesting dynamic where the main character has some sort of power that lets him stand above other people. But more often than that, it barely matters in the end, as it quickly devolves into another fantasy story with bad world building where the isekai part doesn't really matter at all. In essence, I often find this an excuse to not give our main character any kind of backstory whatsoever, as the writer could just say, hey, yeah, they're a normal person from the real world, moving on. How a Realist hero rebuilt the kingdom felt to me like it was going to move away from those tropes. Our main character, Soma, is an economics student that gets isekai just like any other story. When he's summoned to the new world, he quickly learns that he was merely a bargaining chip. To the north of this country, there's a nation that stands between the Demon Empire and the rest of the world. As a result, they demand tributes from other nations in order to protect them from the Demon King. However, the nation it takes place in is relatively poor, so they try to summon up a hero to offer instead. Soma, an economics student, convinces the king to hand over the throne so he can start to institute reforms that'll turn them into a more modern nation. Just from that description, you can probably see some Spice and Wolf vibes from this book. And that's where the book initially hooked me in. Rather than some boring ass fantasy MMO mechanics, we delve deep into the economics and the political structure of the country. For example, Soma discovers that the country is having starvation problems because they're growing mostly cash crops like cotton rather than food. So he has to institute various taxes and incentives in order to get actual food grown. While this sort of story isn't for everyone, there are many out there who probably just had their ears perked up and want to give this story a check for yourself. Well, don't. I really just gave away what half of this book is about, with the other half being boring ass world building and typical harem nonsense. Even if you're a fan of harem, this book doesn't do it well at all. Every time it almost got interesting, it cut away to some dumb shit about what the dukes think about the king. I know that political squabbles are important to a story about economics and politics, but it was just the same thing over and over. When it's not that, we're spending time with the same, oh, the other girls are making the main heroine jealous, oh, how quirky. And I know, it's a light novel, these sort of discussions are part and parcel, but it exists within that uncanny valley where you can't tell if it's supposed to be serious or silly. But overall, the worst part of this book is this. This book absolutely did not need to be this long. If you remove the boring anime hijinks and the bad world building, this could probably be 150 pages. And in that case, this light novel would have been a lot more enjoyable. But overall, a fantastic setup and premise was bogged down by typical isekai tropes that made it unrecognizable by the end. And while the final few pages do suggest that there's going to be some interesting developments in the next book, it doesn't do enough of me for me to care. I definitely won't be reading the next book, 4 out of 10. The next thing I picked up was none other than Bakuman. Primarily, I've been wanting to start a Takashi Obata collection and pretty much own every piece of art he's ever done because he's my favorite manga artist. Typically, when people talk about who's the best manga artist, they just go into who has the most detail. And personally, I don't think those are the same thing. And sure, Miura is way up there with his early works being especially stunning, but even he doesn't stand up to Obata in my opinion. Obata mixes typical unrealistic anime expressions that let him show the emotions of his characters, but at the same time uses hard realism in order to ground our stories in reality. I personally think both Death Note and Bakuman could not have existed with any other artists. Alright, enough of the art, let's talk about Bakuman itself. Since Bakuman was mostly lost to time with the success of Death Note, I'll briefly go over the story. Moshiro and Tagagi have a chance encounter one day and decide to start drawing manga together. And they start making manga together. Yeah, it's not much more complicated than that. Now, the premise has been done to death in recent years, but where Bakuman definitely gets its stripes is in the realism. Through Bakuman, you'll learn every minute detail about the writing, submission, editorial process, competitiveness of the industry, and everything. As I read this, my first thought is that every anime and manga fan should be forced to read this. Fully understanding the pressure of the manga industry gives you a much bigger respect for the kind of work that people put out. Bakuman at face value has literally no shonen tropes, but it might be the most shonen manga I've ever read. In a few chapters, I found myself wanting this duo to completely succeed at life and become the greatest manga authors of all time. Without any sort of special powers or secret moves, I've wanted them to just cut down everyone in their path. Despite the premise being nothing more than two kids draw manga, I found myself hooked in a way that many other shonen simply can't do. Now, it would be remiss if I didn't mention the primary romantic subplot of this manga and the one thing that kind of bugs me. The relationship between Moshiro and his girlfriend, Azuki. Basically, Moshiro accidentally asks Azuki to marry him at the very beginning of the series, but they both agree not to do anything until they're both successful. And by do anything, I mean see each other at all. And I would normally not be upset about this, but this goes on and on without much development at all. Now, I've only read the first 2 volumes of this series, but I feel like the subplot could be heavily reduced or edited down a bit. All in all, I think Bakuman is a criminally underrated series that gets lost to time because it's not about a mass murdering psychopath. 8 out of 10. Okay, before we get to this next manga, let me get one thing out of the way. Actually, you know what? I don't have any justification for picking up this manga. My dad is the queen of all VTubers. You know, it was only a matter of time before someone made a manga about this, but I didn't think it would be so cringe. Wait, what am I saying? Of course I did. My Dad is the Queen of All VTubers is another manga with a pretty self-explanatory title. Takashi is a young high school student that one day stumbles upon his dad streaming to the internet and pretending to be a young girl. Wait, so this manga is about future Gen Z parents? Okay, more specifically, he's pretending to be a VTuber. For those of you who don't know what a VTuber is, I can't blame you in the least. To this day, I'm not even sure what the appeal is, but whatever. It's basically when you use motion capture and voice modification to become a personality on the internet using a 3D avatar rather than a face cam. In this case, his dad is using it to become a super cute female VTuber personality named Kazuki Ai, who just so happens to be the most popular VTuber on the entire internet. Now, if it turned out that my dad was hustling 6 figures from weebs on the internet by pretending to be their waifu, I would be the proudest son in the world. But I guess in order to move the plot along, Takashi finds it cringe as hell. Now, this might seem like the end of the story, but that's actually where this book gets interesting. Turns out Takashi's mom is also trying to become a super cute VTuber, but she doesn't quite have the cute traits that her husband does. So she teams up with Takashi to learn from her father all the tricks of the trade to build up her subscriber base and eventually take the throne from his dad. And of course, this ends up with Takashi going down the dark road of becoming a cute VTuber himself. Now, I just want to point out how wholesome your marriage must be if your primary argument with your spouse is who's the cutest VTuber. In fact, the husband's VTuber avatar is based on his wife. Now, at first you might think that this manga is just a hilarious hijinks between Takashi and his dad, which it is, but this manga goes into the specifics of how to become successful at streaming, which has some pretty hard details about how to develop cute mannerisms and whatnot, which makes me wonder if the mangaka has actually given it a try himself. I did look into it, and the only other thing that this mangaka has written is some rent-a-girlfriend side stories. So make of that what you will. Regardless, My Dad is the Queen of All VTubers is certainly a very strange story, but it's not a bad one. I actually found many of its gags funny rather than cringe, and I might consider getting a second volume if it ever comes out. 6.5 out of 10. And that wraps up the manga for this week. I know that a couple of them were mainstream, but I hope you found something new to read. Or you just don't listen to my reviews and you read the books I said were bad too. Anyway, keep reading, keep weebing, and I'll see you guys next time.